All right, let's go ahead and hear what Doug DeMuro has to say about the 2000 S2000, which is the same year that I have. So let's go ahead and take a look.
The Honda S2000, the original S2000. It's been 6 years since I reviewed a regular S2000. I did the S2000 CR a couple of years ago, 18 months ago.
If you haven't driven an S2000 CR before, I personally haven't, but just hearing about all of the differences that it comes with, the original S2000 is going to feel definitely a lot more different, especially because the CR is an AP2. It has like a significant level of upgrades versus the original, especially model year 2000 S2000 was like the most bare bones that Honda had created and the most like quintessential version of what an S2000 is. So this is probably going to feel like a lot different than the CR that he drove a little while ago, but interested to see what he has to say nonetheless. So
To say, this car reminds me every time I get inside the very same thing, which is if you're looking at a list of the greatest driver's cars of all time and it does not include this car, then that list was not compiled by a serious person.
there you go. He knows what
This
he's talking about.
car deserves to be mentioned in the very highest echelons of cars. I drove to work today in my Carrera GT. It was incredible. I get in this car and I'm thinking, it's not really all that far behind. Obviously, the Carrera GT's got more power and more sound, but in terms of a pure driver's car, this does so many things right that some of the very best pure driver's cars do right.
So pause it right here real quick. Definitely believe that if you're looking at any of the top drivers cars of all time, the S2000 of course has to be up there on, maybe not at the very top, but at least mentioned on the list, just for what the S2000 stood for and why it was created, and just like the pure emotion and feeling that you get when driving an S2000 is like unmatched compared to many other cars that have been made, especially cars nowadays as well. I've had my S2000 for around like 2 years, or no, a little more than 2 years, almost 3 years now at this point. And I've had a handful of other cars, driven a handful of other cars as well, from Supras to Corvettes to WRXs to 911s, you name it, right? I've had the opportunity to drive them, and still the S2000 is, at least from the cars that I've like directly owned, which doesn't include all of those, but has been my favorite car by far. It's the character, the feeling, the sound, the look of the car, and just knowing that you have a piece of history when Honda was really on top of their game, creating things like the NSX, the Integra Type R, the S2000 amongst all of them. Having a very purpose built sports car from the ground up, made just for that car, creates kind of like this different feeling, this different sensation when you drive the car. So actually pretty interested to hear what he has to say, because the Carrera GT is just like that is just like a whole nother level of car. So let's see what he has to say.
This steering feel is absolutely fantastic. Just really, 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 really excellent. It doesn't quite have the same level of precise immediacy as a brand new sports car. There is a little play on center, but you do have an amazing linear feel to the steering that just gives you so much control and makes you feel so capable when you're driving this car. The handling.
So one thing I will just pause right here to say as well. So the steering, I'm sure if you watched other S2000 videos, you hear people say the steering tends to be very numb, right? And here we see Doug saying that the steering is fantastic. So for my personal ownership with the S2000, I think where it shines is actually the opposite of what Doug is saying. It really shines in terms of the directness of the steering, and especially the model year 2000 S2000 steering rack was the most direct out of all of the models outside of the CR, because I believe the CR actually took the steering rack from the model year 2000 S2000s. So to me, when I'm driving it, it's very direct, it's very pointy. You move the car one way, it moves exactly where you want it to go, and that just the feeling from the front end is just so positive when you're driving, and that's something that you really want in a sports car, right? You don't want to be having a steering ratio that's super slow. You're not feeling anything through the wheel, right? And you're kind of going here and there. In my C7 Corvette that I have, my Z51, just regular, base otherwise. That steering it feels very lazy compared to the steering in my S2000. Now, where the S2000 steering starts to feel a little bit weak and starts to feel fall short is the actual steering feel itself. So the actual feeling of the road texture through the steering wheel. That's where things really start to kind of fall off. I don't think it has super great steering feel in that sense. It's not bad, especially compared to modern sports cars nowadays. But I will say that's definitely one of the lower parts of the steering as a whole.
Thing is unbelievable. It's one of the very best, especially at this price point, of any car. The car goes exactly where it's pointed. It's so little and tossable and fun and exciting. It's just like a Miata in that respect. Not going to say it's better or worse. There's a lot of debate about that already. But I will say it's faster. It feels about as quick to change directions as the vaunted Miata, and yet it's a faster overall car to drive. And let's talk about that for a second. People complained when this car came out that you had to work so hard in order to get access to the power. That is true. You do have to work hard, but to me, that has become part of the fun of the car, which is it's just you ring it out and enjoy it.
Going back to the Miata part, let me know in the comments below if you would rather have a Miata over an S2000. For me personally, I think there's just so much more heritage, and honestly, I just think the S2000 looks a lot better, and the F20C engine is just absolutely amazing. And Miatas are great too, don't get me wrong. I love Miatas just as much as the next guy, but the S2000 just has that slight level up, that slight just notch up in terms of a wow factor, character, but it's also more expensive, and it comes at a cost at that rate as well, especially given its age nowadays. But very light, very tossable car, just as Doug was saying.
Back in 2000 when this car came out, back in an age of V8s and that sort of thing, it was whatever. Now we have all these electric cars, we have dual clutch transmissions. Power comes so easy in cars. And in this one, you have to work for it, and that has made this car charming. It's not like any car from this era. You work for the power, and that's a good thing. You can rev out this engine. Frankly, it sounds pretty good.
You have to
and it's a lot of fun to do. And of course, you get the ability to shift gears in one of the great gear shift situations of all time. Perfectly weighted shifter ball, fantastic gear action in the sense that it's not vague at all. It notches perfectly into gear, but it's not too notchy where you're fighting against it or where you're running up against some weird ridges like in some cars. The clutch is great, exactly the weight you want it to be and exactly the smoothness you want it to be. I mean, this car was just designed by people who paid an enormous amount of attention to great sport.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna pause Doug right here real quick to talk about two things. First, the engine itself, and then also the transmission. So the engine is the sweetheart of the car, right? It's just absolutely incredible to rev up to 9,000 or close to 9,000 every single time you drive the car, right? It's just like that feeling of building revs so high and hitting that VTEC crossover like a little under 6,000 RPM is just absolutely insane, and it puts a smile on my face every single time. And I know you hear a lot of people say, oh yeah, you put a smile on my face. This actually, like, legitimately, I promise you, if you get this car, especially if you're used to high revving engines, but even if you're not, this is just a completely different experience that I think everyone should, especially everyone who likes cars, should enjoy, right? You look at any of like the GT3 RSs that come nowadays are all 9,000 RPM engines at the end of the day, and this being a Honda with like the reliability that comes with it, and just like the sound and just how it makes you feel, right? For me, I mean, honestly, I'll put it in the second gear, I'll hit redline, and I'm not even going like anywhere above like, I don't know, like maybe 60 or 65. I don't remember off the top of my head, but for that moment though, it feels like I'm like blasting like 100 miles an hour and my heart's racing, and I'm just, everything else kind of just like disappears like from around you essentially when you just go all the way to 9,000 RPM. And really, that's what really makes the car, that's one of the main things that makes the car very, very special. That, just like Doug was saying, right, you see a lot of electric cars right now, they don't even have, they have like one gear, right? You can't even see the RPMs build, or many of them are all turbocharged, right? They may go at max, what, in like the 718 Caymans, right? Cayman S's, they go to what, like 7,800, 7,500 max, and that's a lot for a turbocharged car nowadays. So to be able to see something that's naturally aspirated, rev all the way to 9,000 RPM, and be as reliable as the F20C is just absolutely remarkable. So the transmission is really great. Everything you said, super notchy, but not too notchy, easy to go. I'll say the one thing about the transmission is the first to second gear shift is that if you just go a little too fast and rush it, that it tends to grind a little bit. And yeah, that's pretty common with like any manual car. You just have to learn its quirks, very much like my Corvette that I have that has a weird fourth to fifth gear grind if you go too fast too early and it's not warmed up. But the other thing too is that with the S2000 transmission that you need to be wary of is that the flywheel is super light, right? So meaning that the revs will go high really fast, but also drop really fast. So when you're switching gears, first, second, third, whatever it may be, right? You want to make sure that you are disengaging and engaging the clutch more quickly than you would in a modern car, right? Because basically the RPMs are falling, and they fall too low by the time that you're shifting. The RPMs could fall too low and it doesn't feel as smooth, right? And it's the same thing when you're heel towing. You don't have that much of a grace period when you're heel towing to get it to the very specific area where it feels very smooth. So just something to be aware of. I mean, I think that adds a lot to the drama of the car. Transmission is one of the best that I've ever driven personally myself. So.
Cars, and they created a great sports car. Add to the fact that it looks good, that it's relatively reliable, that it doesn't really lose value, and that it's a convertible, and so you can enjoy an open roof. It has it all. No wonder S2000s are so desired even 25 years after they first came out. No wonder they're holding their value so well. No wonder the nice ones have really shot up in value. This is an experience you can't get in that many other places, and it's amazing to have the experience here. I will say, if there is a drawback to this car, and there are very few drawbacks to this car, but if there is going to be one, I would say it's not the most special car. When it first came out, it was like, oh, an S2000. Now it's kind of blended into the normalcy of life. Like, nobody looks at you. Like, it's not you wouldn't turn heads at Cars and Coffee. It's not what I would call like a tremendously special or exciting car. You wouldn't freak out if you saw one. It's a great car to drive. It's a great car to be in. It's a great car to shift gears and accelerate. But it's not like, wow, that's a car that gets mentioned in a list of like really, really desirable cars. And as a result of that, as great as it is, I think it will never quite reach the heights of exotic cars or even high performance versions of regular cars, the Z06s of the world, even though frankly
But I think that's one of the cool things though about the S2000 is that it doesn't have to be like this super loud, super aggressive looking car. It's really one of those things that's, I wouldn't even call it a sleeper, but amongst sports cars of all time, right? Like Doug was saying with like the Z06 and the whatever, all these other cars, right? The S2000 is very much a sleeper in that sense, where it is an experience that's really gate kept by the subtlety of the car, right? Of how old and how sometimes you look at the power figures, right? Like 240 horsepower, like who cares, right? Until you drive one of these cars, you just have no idea how amazing of an experience it is, right? And sure, you can drive all these other cars with like, 5, 6, 700,000 horsepower, right? And these are, don't get me wrong, like a lot of the Lamborghinis, Ferraris, McLarens, like all these very expensive cars, I'm sure are amazing to drive. But when you look at something like the S2000 that at its core was made with just to be a driver's car for the love of driving itself, that handles like very few cars made today, that revs all the way to 9,000 RPM, that one even has a manual shifter, but it also feels so great. Like that package in and of itself is so incredibly hard to find, and that even if it doesn't turn heads at Cars and Coffee, which I think sometimes it can, right? If you know what the car is and you're a car enthusiast, I feel like S2000s always get some looks at least. But just for the package of what the S2000 is, I think it's like one of the most understated of the best sports cars of all time.
From a driving perspective, it might be better, but they made a lot of them. They made it for 10 years. So this car will never like have the feel of like, wow, I can't believe I saw one of those today, which is maybe a little bit sad for some people. But from a driving perspective, it is one of the all-time greats. And every time I get in an S2000, I'm reminded I love this car. And so that's the original Honda S2000, one of the coolest cars in its day and still fantastic all these years later. I love this car, I always have, and it's always a treat to drive around in one. And you can buy this one on Cars and Bids.
Awesome. So yeah, so overall with my experience driving the S2000, you know, funny enough, I have both the Corvette and the S2000, and whenever the Corvette breaks, the S2000 is always there, and it's very, very rare that my S2000 is ever broken. I think the only issues that I've ever had with the car was, I'm even trying to think. The flywheel and clutch was old, but it was the original one, so this was over like 20 something years old. So I mean, hey, if you have to change the clutch every like 20 years, hey, I'll take it, you know. I'm trying to think what else there's like some just like minor wear and tear things, like the hoses, anything that's like made out of rubber tends to give out, the gaskets and stuff give out every once in a while, so I'll have to replace those. The heater core had a tiny little leak in it, so it was spewing out like a little bit of coolant. But like outside of that, there aren't any really big catastrophic things that just make the car immobile, that you can never drive it, right? It just always works. It always turns on. I get around like 26 miles per gallon between like mixed highway and city, so it's not like bad on gas mileage, but it's not good also. And I think one of the benefits too is that the aftermarket is just like so big in the community right now, right? So you can really build this car however you want to, and it just takes some mods so well. And I feel like you can also make it if you're like, I mean, like, okay, we all want to make the cars look good, right? I'm a little vain in that sense too, but I feel like you can put so many different types of different like wheels on it, different like aero packages, and it just looks so good. And for me, mine's more of a kind of like an OEM plus type of build right now, and made more for grip driving, right? And it's amazing, right? I go to track days all the time, and one of the most popular cars that you'll see on the track are S2000s. Some of the best drivers in the car in the whole area are driving S2000s. And I think that just shows you how much of an impact the S2000 has had on the overall car community. And especially if you're into more performance driving like I am, this just hits every single box. And the fact that it's still relatively affordable, I mean, it's for a 20 something plus year old car, it's pretty expensive. But, if you're looking in like, those sub 30K, sub 25K, around the 25K to 20 mark, you can get a pretty good example, especially if you're trying to get an AP1. But obviously many people go for the AP2s for, additional reliability without having to change the valve springs, less twitchy, bigger displacement with the F22C engine. But overall, the best S2000 that you can get is the S2000 that you can afford, and the S2000 that is yours. So if I ever do sell the S2000, I know I'm just going to be thinking about it forever. I know it's something that I want to get back into. I'm even thinking about selling both of the cars just to consolidate what I have right now. But I'm always telling myself, if I ever sell it, I'm going to buy another one, because the S2000 is that impactful of an experience, right? So definitely do your research if you're looking at one. And if you haven't already bought one, don't even think about it. Just go and get one. You will not be disappointed, whether it's just to drive around town, whether it's to go on the track or go in the canyons on the weekends, or just something that you want to have as a project car. The S2000 is an absolutely amazing car. A few quick things of the negative parts of the car, I would say, is that it's super noisy inside. It is so noisy. It is like super hard to hear any music that you're playing, so you have to like crank it up pretty loud. There's not a lot of storage space too, but I mean, that's expected of a two-seater convertible, right? So there's even less room in the back. but you can fit a surprising amount of stuff, right? You can fit probably like a few weekend bags in there. And you can fit golf clubs, at least one pair for sure. Before it hits that VTEC crossover, it is like pretty slow. I won't lie. You definitely have to work it, but that's part of the charm of the car, of course. I'm trying to think what else. You know, honestly, it's so hard for me to think about the negative parts of the car outside of the obvious, right? If you need more room, okay, yeah, S2000 is not a great option, right? If you want something that's going to be super torquey, okay, S2000 is not a great option. But if you're looking for that pure driving experience, right, the S2000 is an absolutely amazing option. So thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next S2000 review video. So see you next time.